Alright everyone, I want to thank you all so much for watching this video here along Nevada State Route 375, also known as the Extraterrestrial Highway. So this road right here is hands down one of my most favorite drives I've ever been on, not just only here in the state of Nevada, but one of my favorite drives, period. There's just something about being out here in the middle of nowhere, being miles and miles and miles away from civilization or any town of any remote size for just miles on end, and just pretty much having the road to yourself for most of this drive is just something that is really hard to explain unless you actually drive this road and just have that feeling of being out in the literal middle of nowhere. I already mentioned this in the video itself, but if you are out there near the town of Rachel, Nevada, you are about as far away from like a McDonald's, a Starbucks, a Costco, a Walmart, or any other major retail chain that you can think of. You're about as far away from one of those as you could possibly get here in the lower 48 of the United States, also known as the contiguous United States. And for a lot of people, that's probably the drawback of this highway and why probably it doesn't get a lot of traffic, just because of its isolation. But for me personally, I absolutely love drives like this that are just out in the middle of nowhere, where you pretty much just have the road to yourself and you just get this sense of freedom that's just really hard to explain, like I said, unless you actually come out here and drive the road for yourself. Now, one thing that's kind of a given when you drive this road, and it's to be expected with just how rural this area of Nevada is that you're not going to really have cell phone service for the entire 100-mile length of this road, basically. So you lose cell phone service about 5 miles there past the Nevada State Route 318 junction, and you will not get cell service again until you get really close to the US 6 junction there at the north end of the highway. And it should also be noted that there is only one gas station on this entire route, and it's right there in the small town of Rachel. And to be honest, I've never even seen people at that gas station, so I'm not even sure if they even have gas. So if you're going to be driving this road between the town of Alamo and Tonopah, just be prepared to go for roughly 140 miles without running into a gas station, unless that gas station there in Rachel, Nevada just so happens to be open. But just expected to go roughly 2 hours without running into any gas stations. My general rule of thumb is when you're about to drive the Extraterrestrial Highway, you want to have at least a half tank of gas just to get to the other end of the highway, and then you have to drive an additional 50 miles to Tonopah, or about 10 miles to Alamo if you're at the southern end of the highway. And if you guys do get to drive this road, I highly recommend stopping there in the small town of Rachel in the middle of the Nevada desert, because let me tell you folks, the Little Ailey Inn there in Rachel, Nevada is quite an interesting place to stop at if you really are into aliens or any of like the extraterrestrial form of life that there potentially is out there. I'm not going to say that there is or isn't, but feel free to debate that down in the comments below. But like I said, the Little Ailey Inn there in Rachel, Nevada actually does have services. So if you're like hungry and you want to get like a good burger, I highly recommend stopping there. Just make sure you're stopping there within business hours. And to be honest, their business hours aren't really that concrete or very like consistent, and they seem to change whenever they just kind of feel like it, which kind of makes sense. I mean, because there's really nothing out there. So, and I'm sure they don't really get a lot of visitors as it is, just because of how remote this highway is. But always just be sure to call ahead and see when and if they're going to be open when you're going to be passing through the area, because their business hours are not always reliable. But I will say that they do have really good food there. I can say from experience when I was passing through this area in 2020. And speaking of 2020, what a year that was, am I right? But anyways, when I drove this road back in 2020, I was just absolutely blown away by just how beautiful and remote this road truly is out here in this part of Nevada. And so I knew I wanted to come back and re-record this video for you guys, because this road, like I said, is absolutely beautiful from one end all the way to the other. I know desert driving isn't for everybody, but let me tell you folks, the vistas that you see on this road and just how far you can actually see when it's a clear day, like what it was when I filmed here in 2024, you could just see for miles and miles and miles. And let me tell you folks, it's just really beautiful just to see like a side of Nevada that not a lot of people really get to see. And I'm really glad I got to showcase it for you all to see here on YouTube. Alright everyone, are you guys ready to talk about Area 51? Because I'm sure you guys have been wanting me to talk about it here for the last couple of minutes while I've been ranting and raving about this highway here in Nevada. So let's talk about Area 51. So I'm sure you guys can see out there in the distance a dirt road that kind of looks like it just goes off into the distance there. It almost looks like it's actually Nevada State Route 375, but it's not. So that dirt road that you see out there in the distance is actually called Groom Lake Road. And I'm not sure if I'm the right type of person to be telling you this information or not, but let's just say that that road is one of the key access points that you can access Area 51 if you choose to go there. Now, I am in no way, shape, or form condoning anybody to visit Area 51 because that is a very top secret government place that you definitely don't want to go to if you're not authorized to go there. And just look at the whole fiasco of Storm Area 51 back in, I believe, 2019 to see what happened with that. So just be warned, if you go too far along Groom Lake Road, there's going to be some consequences for you, but you can legally go all the way up to the gate, I believe, which is basically the unofficial gate, or the official gate, I guess in this case, that accesses Area 51. And this road is actually the closest federal or state maintained highway that goes near Area 51. So that's why it has all of the alien and extraterrestrial folklore that surrounds this highway and everything like that. It's led to numerous conspiracy theories of all the various UFO sightings that have been reported along this road because of its proximity to Area 51. So yeah, if you want to come here at night, be my guest. I have yet to drive this road at night, and I'm not too sure if I want to do that anytime soon, but if you've been here at night and seen some interesting things, feel free to let me know down in the comments because I'm sure it will lead to a very interesting discussion. And let me tell you folks, it's not just all the alien folklore and the extraterrestrial life that you'll potentially see along this road. I just highly recommend driving this road if you ever get the chance to do it because, like I said, if you love being in the middle of nowhere and you love being in remote areas, then this is definitely the type of road that you want to drive. It is potentially one of the most desolate roads that you'll ever drive in your life, and it's definitely one of the most desolate roads that you can drive here in the United States. I can't say enough good things about this road. There's definitely way more good things than bad things about this road. Let me tell you folks, don't let the isolation fool you. If you get the chance to drive this road, I guarantee you're going to have a good time, and I guarantee you're not going to see a lot of people along the way, so just enjoy the time to yourself that you're going to experience along this road. And if you've been along this road, feel free to let me know what your experiences were like driving along this road down in the comments because I'd love to read about them. Alright everyone, I just want to give a shout out to all my social media accounts that you see on the screen here because I really am trying to grow my social media accounts beyond just here on YouTube. I would really appreciate it if you guys would check out my Instagram. I'm really trying to grow that social media platform, so I would really appreciate it if you guys would follow me on there. My username is just InterstateKyle. What's really cool about my Instagram is if I'm on a road trip, I will post on my story of where I am and what I'm doing, so it's just a really cool way for you guys to follow along with me in real time to see what I'm doing and what I'm up to. I know my videos on here can get pretty dated very quickly, so if you guys want to see what I'm doing in real time, I highly recommend checking out my Instagram, and I would really appreciate your support over there. You guys can also check out my Facebook group and my Twitter/X account. The links to all those are down in the description. Another thing I want to give a shout out to is my Patreon, which is a way for you guys to support me beyond YouTube here. If you guys want to join my Patreon, you guys can get special perks for joining, like watching all of my videos early before they are released here on YouTube. And all the money I make on there goes right back into this YouTube channel to keep producing more of these types of videos in the future. The link to my Patreon is also down in the description, so if you really want to check it out, I would really appreciate your extra support over there as well. And another thing that is set up on my channel is Super Thanks, which is located to the right of where you would normally like one of my videos. What that basically is just a way for you guys to tip me out for each video going forward if you feel that I've earned it, of course. And then all the money on there also goes right back to this channel to keep producing more of these types of videos in the future. And with all that said, folks, I really hope you all enjoyed this ride here along the Extraterrestrial Highway here in Nevada. I want to thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you all have an amazing day, and take care everyone. Stay tuned to the next adventure, and we will see you next time.